And if you don't mind to begin by introducing yourself and also to talk about the BDS SA Coalition, and then I guess we can introduce the conference that took place over the weekend.
Okay, so I'm Roshan Dadu, the coordinator of the South African BDS Coalition. And we came about a couple of years ago, bringing together different groups of Palestine solidarity activists here in South Africa. So groups like the South African Jews for a Free Palestine, a group called Palestine Solidarity Alliance, the Palestine Solidarity Campaign, and various campus groups and others. Into one coalition, and now the coalition is the affiliate of the Palestinian BDS National Committee. So we're part of the kind of global BDS movement. And then there's partly out of that, the BDS movement globally realized that they had over-focused on the North, on Europe and the States in terms of developing solidarity and BDS campaigns. And so they launched a Global South initiative, which was just as the coalition was starting. So we were part of that, which got together, in fact, former presidents and stuff signed the initial Global South call. And the idea was to try to strengthen in Latin America, in Asia, and also in Africa, the solidarity movement. So out of all of that, we started to make connections with people and individual activists and groups where there were groups across the continent. And this meeting now we've just had in Dhaka was, in fact, the first time we've come together in real life. So we had a 2-day strategy meeting, and then we had a meeting on the Saturday that was a kind of public event and a press conference. And for that, we brought Mandla Mandela, the grandson of Nelson Mandela, and also Emma Nyerere, who's the granddaughter of Julius Malema Nyerere. So that was the Saturday. But I think I'll put the Facebook and Twitter handles because there's all the info and pictures and whatnot going around there. But yeah, so that's the coalition and how we started working with PAPSIN and what brought us to have this meeting now a few days ago. Oh, it was also, we decided to host it in Senegal, partly because there's a strong solidarity group there, and the Amnesty International Senegal branch is quite strong, but more importantly, because of the whole AU fiasco, and because Senegal, Macky Sall, the president, is now the chair of the AU, and from that disastrous way in which the end of the heads of state meeting ended, with this committee of 3 in favor of Israeli accreditation and 3 against countries, heads of state, Macky Sall is now the chair. So, you know, it's important to try to put pressure on him because he obviously can tip the balance in favor of Israel, especially as he just signed a multi-million-dollar arms deal with Israel. But nevertheless, the feeling in Senegal is traditionally and still is very pro-Palestinian. And they do sort of almost permanently chair the Committee on Palestine in the UN. So we're trying to put pressure, particularly on Senegal, because it's totally contradictory if they're chairing that committee and then, you know, allowing Israel to accredit to the AU. So that was why Senegal.
And I see that 20 nations attended or sent delegations. And I'm just curious, over the course of the over the course of the weekend, what kind of subjects were discussed? What was the structure of the conference itself? Was the focus entirely on Israel's AU observer status, or was there also a discussion, like you mentioned, of Israel's connections militarily, diplomatically with individual nations as well?
Yeah, no, I mean, we started off, because it was sort of the first time we'd all met together, we started off with each country giving a very brief sort of answer to a few questions about the solidarity movement and what Israel is up to in their countries and what are the challenges and what are the sort of possible opportunities and so on. And then from that, on the second day, we looked particularly at Christian Zionism, which is a huge thing on the continent. In some countries, I mean, it's massive. People going, thousands of people go on so-called pilgrimages to Israel, and the way in which the issue is is kind of told through the church, and the way in which people relate to churches, mostly the evangelical and Presbyterian and churches, but the role they play is so significant that people were saying, that the preachers are like mentors and fathers, and you don't question them. And so if they get this idea that Israel is a home for the Jews because of some supposed biblical and theological arguments, people don't question it. So looking at ways in which we can try to challenge that, because it's really just another field of hasbara, but it's very potent in the continent. I mean, in South Africa too, but even more so in other countries. So that was one thing we looked at particularly. And then also the agriculture and development assistance, because that's the other thing Israel's targets in Africa. These kind of water projects and agri-tech projects and training people and blah, 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 both as the government, development assistance, but increasingly, well, Israel changed its strategy so that now the government encourages these startup companies to come, they get incentivized to come and do these projects and partnerships. But often they just fail anyway. They big it up and they make it sound really great to governments and stuff. But in reality, we're sort of mapping, in South Africa, we just started, well, we've kind of mapped what projects there are, and they're way more than you would think in a country that takes a strong Palestinian position. But in other countries, it's worse. But often they don't, they're kind of like white elephants. I think in Angola, they set up this moshav, and it was this huge farm thing. And it's just like in tatters now. There's no, it's kind of not, it doesn't work, or it doesn't, it's just a sort of showcase, basically, for then selling governments military and high-tech spyware and stuff like that. It's kind of a way in, a soft way into to make people feel that Israel is beneficial for development, especially because it offers all this training and stuff. So that was the other big area that we looked at. I mean, some of this high-tech stuff hasn't it, that scandal recently where a company claims to do something before it's even actually done it. What do you call that? Remember, it was in the news recently, a big scam where people gave money for something like a startup thing. So they make all these claims, and then often it's not even like they've actually done it outside of kind of laboratory setting, or it's just not, applicable. It's not done with any kind of real intention to have, of what the conditions and the context is. So they sort of sound very flashy and good, but aren't sustainable. Well, there's one project that where they to do with getting water from clouds. I don't know, something, but in reality, it's what our water. Someone who used to head up our water, the government department, said it's like having a generator on the back of a little truck. It's really not something that's you could seriously propose to answer the needs of water for all and access to water in South Africa. That was so. Those kind of projects, and then leading from that into the military and the spyware, like the Pegasus spyware and so on, because obviously those products are tested on Palestinians and then used. The only reason our governments will buy them is to use it on us. So, it's a no-win situation both ways, or to fuel conflicts, like in the north of Mozambique at the moment in Cabo Delgado. There's the involvement of kinds of Israeli military things. Kenya has a very strong military cooperation with Israel. I mean, they actually have proper training, and they have developed their intelligence and security services. So to try to get information and find out about that and expose that because it impacts on, it's a way of saying, look, this is what they do to Palestinians, but then this is what they do here, that we also end up suffering from these things. So that was the other kind of main area we looked at.
And I'm curious in how, so discussing the history of military and developmental coordination, we've seen definitely with respect with the AU and recent diplomatic moves, Israel trying to kind of move itself closer to African nations, or in the case of under the Trump presidency, this move to try and get countries like Morocco and Sudan to recognize Israel, which has promoted a huge backlash by the people who actually, live there and are in support of Palestine. So I wonder how that divide kind of came into play, and in that South Africa, as you mentioned, has historically, because of the history of apartheid, been one of the strongest pro-Palestine nations and has this downgraded diplomatic status, but other African countries have a much stronger diplomatic status, have, for whatever reason, if they've been coerced into it by the US or they believe they need it for military reasons, have a stronger relationship. So how did this divide going in with some nations, and even we saw it at the AU as well, with the debates going back and forth, some nations you could kind of consistently see they're taking a certain path because of their history with Israel. So did that play a role in what countries did and did not attend? And did it impact the debates, or were pretty much all the countries in attendance solidly in the pro-Palestine camp?
I mean, yes, they were solidly in the pro-Palestinian thing. It was activists, so it was civil society, not government people, from all the countries. So we did have someone from Morocco and two people, I think, from Sudan. So we were looking to see how can we collectively help them put pressure on their governments. But of course, in the case of Sudan, it's possible that Sudan could change its position but they said they were demonstrations still every day, and people were getting killed in these demonstrations, but it's still not, at least the popular movement is still there to try to get rid of the military led regime that's there, that has been the one that has gone along with this normalization with the UAE and this promise of sanctions being dropped. And again, with Morocco, there's a huge popular sentiment against having this normalized relationship with Israel. But the government has, gone ahead with it for whatever its own. I mean, Morocco anyway is a colonizer like Israel. So, they've always had this kind of, if not formally, openly, this kind of similarity in the way they operate. But even with South Africa, I mean, we've downgraded our embassy in Israel. We still have a massive Israeli embassy here. And just recently, a new ambassador was, at the normal, giving their credentials, but as a normal country, I mean, we made a fuss about it, but, it's not, we have not broken diplomatic ties, nor have we broken trade ties, nor have we got consistently any kind of policy around sport and culture boycott. There was a big noise when our Miss South Africa was going to Israel for the Miss Universe contest. And then the government said it withdrew support. But just last week, a Davis Cup tennis team went from South Africa to Israel. And we made a fuss about it, and we wrote to the government and said, look, show some consistency, but we haven't heard back from them. So it's not, it's not always consistent. I think at the moment our foreign minister is very strong on the issue of Palestine, and she's really, really raised it up in the AU, and our president then also in the heads of state meeting. But again, South Africa doesn't want to operate alone. And you can see that Israel is trying to isolate South Africa's voice in multilateral fora on the issue. SADC took a position against accreditation, but then there's countries within SADC that broke the consensus, basically. which is an issue for SADC because it's not normally how they operate if you do get a SADC position. And it was a fight to get that position apparently, but then the norm is that you don't break the consensus. Like with the AU, the norm is that it's things that are agreed on the basis of consensus. So the whole question of Israel is having a bigger impact than just that in the way in which the AU operates. And of course, Israel wants to divide the Africa bloc voting in the UN General Assembly, particularly now with the growing call for Israel to be called out as an apartheid state and for some kind of resolution to go to the General Assembly, which could potentially lead then to sanctions and so on, because the argument is, of course, well, if it's an apartheid state, then do what you did to South Africa. So, they want to break up that, because without the Africa bloc is the biggest number of votes. So if you can break that consensus, you can, in their mind, you can then make sure that such resolutions never get passed. So, that's the kind of situation at the government level. But nevertheless, if you can, if we can mobilize on the ground, grassroots, civil society, academics, all the rest of it, and support each other across the continent, there is the possibility that governments also need votes. So apart from the really despotic ones, they do at some point need to listen to what people are saying, or if opposition parties take up the cause, you have some possibility of changing that. But also just to make people more, raise awareness that this kind of idea of Israel as this benign benefactor for development assistance isn't the case, that it does sell this military stuff that fuels wars on the continent, and to try and challenge this Christian Zionist, well, saying Christian Zionist, but broader influence within Christianity that spreads a myth basically about Israel. But also with the issue now of Ukraine, of course, people are saying, look at the hypocrisy. It clearly is possible for the international community to very rapidly isolate a country. This, like FIFA, they always say, oh no, but FIFA will never, and UEFA will never. Well, they did it within a couple of days. I think FIFA first of all said they would get the Russia games to play, without an audience. And then even that, they were pressured to say, no, they won't play at all. In 2 days that was done, with all the other kind of sanctions and measures to isolate culturally and every other which way Russia. It does prove that it is actually possible, and increasingly, people are making that comparison and that hypocrisy on the part of the West in particular around who you decide is the biggest enemy and how you can act against them, whereas this situation for 70 years goes on and nobody, you can't do anything about it. So I think perversely that may also at least make people feel that something can be done and that the international community can actually do something if it wants to. So then the question is, why doesn't it want to? Why are countries not wanting to do that? Or why is a Palestinian with a Molotov cocktail or even a pebble or even nothing in their hands a terrorist? And why are they, explaining on BBC how to make a Molotov cocktail in Ukraine? It's ridiculous. The notion of who has the right to resist and so on, or who has the right to be a refugee.
Right. And I think that speaks to something that I also, heard from when I talked to Africa for Palestine, which was this historical sentiment of solidarity that is kind of deep within African nations. And on the one hand, so as you're saying, that the history of resistance to colonialism that all African nations had to experience, and therefore have this solidarity at some level with Palestine for their current ongoing struggle against colonialism. But then at a more recent level, for example, with South Africa, I wonder how the Amnesty International report on apartheid had, now coming out, it seemed like it was a huge title shift within South Africa, at least to say, this is like confirmation of apartheid. You had a statement come out from the international relations minister who said this would be the pretext for direct diplomatic action against Israel. We're still waiting to see exactly what that means, but I wonder how the Amnesty International report in particular has helped shift the conversation to help South Africans understand this in the view of apartheid, which already was happening, but now is kind of confirmed in some level, and also how elements of solidarity like that anti-colonial struggle, help people from across the African continent understand the Palestinian situation.
Yes, I think it's helped enormously, but also because it's almost the culmination of so many other reports from B'Tselem and Yesh Din in Israel, the Human Rights Watch report, various UN, that report, I can never remember the acronym, the West Asian UN body where the report was then pulled. I can't remember the acronym. And then various South Africans, I mean, our human HRSC, Human Research and Science Council, HRSC, wrote a report, it was over 10 years ago, sort of kind of a report evidencing, actions of Israel as apartheid. Eminent South Africans like Archbishop Tutu, who came back from Palestine and said it was worse than apartheid. So that it's all of those things together, I think the Amnesty report has sort of galvanized that. And I think Amnesty has done quite well in publicly, not just publishing the report, but having a strategy of publicizing it afterwards. So the author of the report, Salah Hijazi from Amnesty in Palestine, was in South Africa a couple of weeks ago. So we had meetings with him and he met with the government, with the foreign minister and so on. So I think they've really made an effort to use the report to make the point and to sort of almost makes it a consensus in a way of, and of course initially Palestinian people themselves who were saying this is apartheid, but now even the PA is saying it's apartheid, which they had not previously, and our government is slowly getting that language into its statements and so on. So yeah, I think it's had a big impact, and of course it makes South Africa, it kind of highlights South Africa as soon as you say apartheid. So obviously we are trying to say, yes, Israel is a settler colonial state, it's an apartheid state, and those links with the liberation movements on our continent with Palestine that were so strong, even for younger people on the continent who maybe don't relate to their own liberation struggles in the same way or feel their liberation, what were the liberation movements in government have let everybody down. There is a renewed interest in a decolonial discourse. So again, trying to bring back the Palestinian struggle and the apartheid issue into that kind of anti-colonial, decolonializing of things. And again, I think it's helped in that way too. And in fact, Saleh Jazi also came to Dakar, so that was quite good.
I guess on that note, you mentioned at the outset the rationale for moving towards having global South solidarity with Palestine, and that prompted me to wonder whether kind of the theme of analysis that I've been seeing and even in this conversation of trying to ask why northern, I guess in the global North nations, for example, are so willing to have solidarity with Ukraine, but so unwilling to have solidarity with Palestine. Do you think that this is the beginning of a new kind of initiative on behalf of the pro-Palestine movement to go where, solidarity historically has been from other global South nations that are part of that have this anti-colonial experience that sympathize with Palestine. But I guess in the world now, as it's changing to potentially be something of a multipolar world that has opportunities for the global South to assert itself more definitively, do you see that as a new strategy for the BDS movement to shift away from trying to convince global North nations to, to sanction Israel, which seems like a long time process, and to shift towards encouraging the countries that already may have some sympathy or may be inclined to have some sympathy with Palestine to take a more definitive stance, like South Africa, which has been such a leader?
Yeah, I don't know if it's a new strategy. I think it was more, you tend to rely on the global South and in the UN especially to take a pro-Palestinian line, and not realizing, like in Africa, the ways in which Israel is capturing governments on the continent and actually and undermining that. So I think it was more not, and also not having built up quite as strong. I think in particularly in Europe, but also maybe in the States, there's been quite a change in the strength of the Palestine solidarity movements in both those countries. So their governments are not budging, and there's a lot of repressive legislation around BDS and stuff. But it seems like, certainly I grew up there, my parents were in exile, South Africans in exile under apartheid there. And, it was very, very small, the Palestine solidarity movement at the time. It was not a popular issue. I mean, it was still, we were still working to make the South African anti-apartheid movement, into a popular movement. But it seems like there has been a shift. And so now, in a way, forces are a bit strengthened and looking at the global South, where there's been a whittling away of that traditional support. I think it's made the BDS movement to need to really.
Well, in that case, I think my final couple of questions are, where do you see the movement for Palestinian solidarity on the African continent growing and expanding? What are the areas of opportunity? And then where this question of Israel's observer status within the African Union is heading. The last, as you said, the last update I saw was it was kind of tabled indefinitely by the AU heads of state to be discussed at a further date. It seems that there's a general agreement that the move was taken without proper consultation of the other nations within the AU. But I think it brings up a question of, the African Union, previously having been the Organization of African Unity, had Israel as an observer, but with it changing to the African Union, I guess kind of in the post-apartheid era as well, South Africa trying to take a more definitive role and being still consistently pro-Palestine, had been able to successfully delay that observer status for a while until recently. So I wonder if that too is a sign that something is changing within the general African Union membership, or if this was still just a unilateral move taken by the AU without consultation, and there's going to be a significant pushback that can recommit to the stance, the post 2002 post apartheid stance of being definitively pro-Palestine.
Well, I think firstly the decision was taken unilaterally by the chair of the AU Commission, Mr. Faki, so it wasn't even up to discussion. We knew that it would be controversial and that it wouldn't pass through consensus. So it's all been done in a very underhand way, actually, because he initially accepted the credentials of the Israeli ambassador, which apparently in the constitutive act and the rules and regulations, it's in his power to do that. But obviously on something so controversial, don't do that, because you know that you're going to get a number of countries, and some of, well, in fact, the stronger, the countries that underpin the AU, like the Saudis, and apart now from Libya is gone, but Nigeria, Algeria, and South Africa, were going to object to it. So, you know, the whole thing was shoddy. And when it went to the foreign ministers, it was a battle of the foreign ministers to get it on the agenda. It was originally just on the notes of decisions taken, you know, right at the end of the meeting, not an item for discussion. And our foreign minister in Algeria pushed to get it on the agenda so it was even discussed. Then the discussion was so poorly chaired, and personally, you know, it was poorly chaired, and they were trying to shut up our minister and the other ones that they knew were going to object. They didn't also then have a proper process. So the meeting kind of that foreign minister's meeting ended in a shambles, and it was just agreed, okay, we'll go to the heads of state. So none of it has been done properly. Then it went to the heads of state meeting, and again, the whole thing was a shambles. In the morning, it was discussed, and it was understood by everybody that Israel would not. We knew that they were going to propose this committee of the three countries in favour of the event, which is fine if in the meanwhile Israel has no status. It's not fine if in the meanwhile Israel retains its accreditation, because then you're stuck with them and you've got 3 for and 3 against, and Macky Sall as chair. So how they're going to resolve it, I don't know. But the problem was that in the morning it was understood Israel would not be accredited until this committee came with some resolutions or recommendations. By the evening, it was somehow changed so that when the president was kind of summating at the end of the meeting, it was clear that Israel was not accredited in the meanwhile. So South Africa was trying to raise objections, and they were not taking the speakers, and it was a big, you know, again, you know, like a managing the whole thing. Then Macky Sall was insisting, no, we must go, it was the AFCON finals, and obviously Senegal was in the finals. So we have to up the internet because he has to go to watch the football. And others were saying that. And so the whole thing was just left in a mess because you could see the media. We were following through the day from people that we knew from different countries that were there at the AU. People started reporting it's a victory Israel has been thrown out from the morning. And we were saying, I tried to figure out what was going on. And then other people were saying, no, it's not. So the whole thing was really confusing. And only by the evening you could see that they sneakily managed to keep Israel in whilst this committee deliberates. So it was very strange. You know, none of it has been done properly. The process hasn't been properly done. So I think even on that basis, you know, countries may feel fed up about the matter, just because it's having a bigger impact. Like we said, it has a big impact if you push it to a vote in the AU. It's never happened before on something so controversial that will split the AU in effect. It will have wider repercussions. Not that I think the AU is necessarily the most wonderful organization on earth, but nevertheless, you know, it's there and it does bring together the countries on the continent and so on, and the impact it will have on the voting bloc in the UN as well. So I think the whole thing is a fiasco, and it is something I think that, you know, throws pushback from not only countries and the governments, but also people within government's own countries are pushing back. So who knows how it will resolve itself, but I think at the very least we have to keep it on the agenda. We have to keep people reminding people that it's not resolved, that this can't continue. Israel didn't find it particularly, they wanted to vote because they believe that would definitively secure them the accreditation, and it would split the AU, which of course is what they want. So it was weird looking at the unfolding headlines that day on the Israeli papers. Initially, they reported that they had been thrown out, and then they quickly husbanded everything. And then they finally realized they hadn't, but they also were not showing like it was a victory. So I think things are kind of, you know, could go either way, really, on that AU issue, and it's just important to keep it up in people's minds and not let governments off the hook if people can just go quiet and go away. There has to be food
What was the other? Oh, building with solidarity movement. Well, I think this coming together for the first time, that in itself helps. And now, like today, the comrades in Kenya said that they have finally managed to get the falafel franchise in Kenya to declare itself an apartheid-free zone and stop using Israeli products in their meals. So, it's sort of like we've done little videos to support their campaign. It sounds like a small thing, but it's big in Kenya. It's a huge pro-Israel government country, that we can persuade the business to do that. And so now we're sort of amplifying it all around the continent, telling people when you're there, you go to falafel, the Richfield Falafel House, Kenya, that congratulate them, blah blah blah. So they sort of support each other on campaigns within each other's countries as well as we sort of and so on. But also around the Christian Zionism, we want to try to see if we can, with the Kairos initiative, try to bring some Palestinian, eminent Palestinian Christians and really target them and visit to have an impact on the, like the national bodies of these churches, rather than the churches, but and also on the theological training schools. Try to see how we could start to challenge that narrative in a sort of a continental way. And then also we will get a lot of people that come from the different groups who are young women and so very strong and active and energetic and committed and informed young women. So I think definitely looking at trying to broaden the appeal to young people and women in particular on the continent, often people involved in the advocacy campaigns that are really committed to taking up issue with Palestine. So yeah, I think that's the other sort of thing we want to try to pursue going forward.
Well, that sounds very exciting, and from that, I hope I can assume there will be more Pan-African anti-apartheid conferences in the future.
Yes, definitely. And I'll put the all the Facebook and so on.
Great.
And up somewhere, I'll try to send it to you as well.
Fantastic. Excellent. Well, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to give me more information about the conference, and it sounds fantastic, and I would love definitely to attend a future one. So so take care, and good luck with the continuing struggle, even though it is very difficult to break through it at times. It's definitely something that is very, very valuable, and this continuing kind of cooperation from the Global South with supporting and having solidarity for Palestine is very important. And I've been really impressed to see the initiative being taken by definitely South Africa in particular, but really this emerging coalition of African nations to really push for action. So I think it's something to continue watching in the future for sure.
And please send us whatever you write.
Yes, for sure. I'll send you the article as soon as it's finished. Yes. Yes, for sure. All right. Take care.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.